Okay, buckle up, because we're diving headfirst into the fascinating world of guys who live alone. Not because they have to, but because they choose to. Forget the stereotypes of a lonely, sad bachelor. We're talking about a dude who's actively chosen the single life, and what that actually means. Is it just about binge-watching Netflix in your underwear? Nah, there's way more to it than that. Let's unpack some seriously cool stuff about these lone wolf types, inspired by certain video you may or may not have seen. We're going to build on the original content, expand it, make it more, well, us. Think of it as taking that video, throwing it in a blender with a ton of extra ideas and experiences, and pouring out a whole new cocktail of insight. And don't worry, we're keeping it real. No fancy pants academic language here. So, ditch the image of the sad singleton. Because what if living solo isn't a sign of failure, but a secret superpower? What if these guys are actually onto something we're all missing? Get ready to have your assumptions challenged. The lone wolf. More than just a stereotype. Society loves to box people in, right? Especially men. You're supposed to get a good job, find a wife, pop out some kids, and live happily ever after in a white picket fence. Anything outside of that is weird. And a guy living alone? Instant assumptions of loneliness, desperation, and general inadequacy. The thing is, that's a load of bull. This isn't about hating on relationships. Love is awesome. But it's about recognizing that the pressure to be in a relationship, to constantly seek external validation, can actually hold you back. A man who's happy in his own skin, who doesn't need a partner to feel complete, is a force to be reckoned with. And a lot of that comes down to choosing solitude, not being stuck with it. Think about it. How many rom-coms are about someone who can't be happy until they find the one? It reinforces this idea that you're only half a person until you're coupled up. But what if you're already whole? What if being alone is an opportunity to discover who you really are without all the external noise? This isn't just some modern-day self-help guru nonsense. History is full of examples of thinkers, warriors, and leaders who spent significant time in solitude. They weren't hiding from the world. They were preparing to conquer it. They understood that solitude wasn't a punishment. It was a laboratory for the mind. The Stoics, those ancient badasses of philosophy, were all about this. Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus. These guys believed that true happiness came from self-mastery, not from external things like relationships, wealth, or power. It was about being in control of your own thoughts, emotions, and actions. And how do you achieve that? By spending time alone, reflecting, and getting to know yourself. Let's be honest, most people are terrified of being alone with their thoughts. They fill every waking moment with distractions, social media, TV, endless chatter. But the man who embraces solitude, he dives into the silence. He uses it to his advantage. He's not running away from himself. He's running towards himself. And that's the key. This isn't about being a hermit. It's about understanding that your relationship with yourself is the most important relationship you'll ever have. And a man who thrives in solitude, he's mastered that relationship. So, let's dive into some of the reasons why the lone wolf archetype might be more powerful, more resilient, and more, well, happy than you think. 1. The DIY king, mastering self-sufficiency. Okay, let's get practical. One of the first things you learn when you live alone is that you are solely responsible for your survival. No one's going to magically do your laundry, cook your dinner, or pay your bills. It's all on you. For some people, that sounds like a nightmare. But for the solo man, it's an opportunity to become ridiculously self-sufficient. Think about it. When you're constantly relying on others, whether it's for emotional support, financial assistance, or just basic life tasks, you're essentially outsourcing your own competence. You're giving away your power. But when you're forced to handle everything yourself, something amazing happens. You become capable. You learn how to fix a leaky faucet, how to budget your money, how to cook a decent meal, even if it's just ramen at first. You figure things out because you have to. This isn't just about acquiring practical skills. It's about developing a mindset of self-reliance. It's about knowing deep down that you can handle whatever life throws your way. I remember when I first moved out on my own. I was totally clueless. I burned toast on a regular basis. My laundry was a disaster, and I nearly flooded my apartment trying to unclog a toilet. But over time, I learned. I watched YouTube tutorials, I asked for help, and I figured things out. And with each challenge I overcame, my confidence grew. And that's the real superpower of self-sufficiency. It builds unshakable confidence. When you know you can rely on yourself, you become less afraid of taking risks. You're less dependent on external validation. You're simply freer. Seneca, being the Stoic guru that he was, nailed this when he said, "He who is content with the least is the richest." It's not about having a ton of stuff. It's about being content with what you have and knowing that you can provide for yourself. This extends beyond just practical skills and finances. It also applies to your emotional well-being. A man who is self-sufficient emotionally doesn't need constant reassurance or validation from others. He's comfortable in his own skin. He knows his worth. He doesn't need someone else to complete him because he was never incomplete to begin with. Think about how many people panic at the thought of being alone for even a few hours. They feel restless, anxious, incomplete. They constantly need to be connected, validated, entertained. But the man who has mastered self-sufficiency finds something else entirely: peace. He finds peace in his own company. By mastering self-sufficiency, he not only becomes independent in a practical sense, but also mentally and emotionally. He realizes that he is enough, that he doesn't need someone else to define his worth or bring him happiness. He's built his own damn foundation, and it's solid as hell. 2. The silent sanctuary, embracing solitude as strength. We've already touched on this, but it deserves a deeper dive. Because let's face it, our society has a major problem with solitude. It's seen as a last resort, a sign of failure, something to be avoided at all costs. But what if that's completely wrong? What if solitude is actually a vital ingredient for a fulfilling life? The man who understands himself doesn't just tolerate solitude, he embraces it. He doesn't see it as an empty void that needs to be filled with distractions. He sees it as an opportunity, a chance to think, to reflect, to grow. Marcus Aurelius, that emperor philosopher, put it beautifully. Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul. Think about that for a second. In a world that's constantly bombarding you with noise and distractions, your own mind is the one place where you can truly find peace. But you have to cultivate that space. You have to be willing to spend time alone, getting to know yourself. Most people never do this. They might be physically alone, but their minds are still racing, jumping from one thought to another, fueled by social media, news, and endless streams of information. They're never truly present with themselves. But the man who embraces solitude, he shuts out the noise. He turns off the screens. He sits in silence. And in that silence, he starts to hear his own thoughts. He starts to understand his own emotions. He starts to develop mental clarity. This isn't always easy. It can be uncomfortable at first. You might start to confront thoughts and feelings that you've been avoiding for years. But that's the point. Solitude is a crucible. It's a place where you can burn away the impurities and emerge stronger, more resilient, and more authentic. Think about the great warriors, thinkers, and leaders throughout history. Many of them spent long periods alone, whether in exile, self-imposed isolation, or deep meditation. They knew that solitude wasn't a weakness. It was a tool for sharpening the mind. When you remove the distractions of the outside world, you can finally focus on what truly matters. You can reflect on your goals, your purpose, your weaknesses, and your strengths, without the influence of others clouding your judgment. I've personally found this to be incredibly powerful. I used to be constantly seeking external validation. I needed to be around people, to be liked, to be approved of. But when I started spending more time alone, things shifted. I began to realize that my own opinion of myself was far more important than anyone else's. I started to enjoy my own company. I discovered new hobbies, new interests, new ways to express myself. I became more confident, more self-assured, and more at peace with who I was. Solitude isn't about avoiding people. It's about making peace with yourself. It's about understanding that you are enough, that you don't need to be constantly surrounded by others to feel complete. It's a training ground, a place where you can strip away the noise of the world and truly understand who you are. And a man who understands himself is a man that no one can break. It allows you to choose your relationships more consciously and deliberately. 3. The master of calm, developing emotional control and inner peace. Okay, so you're alone, you're self-sufficient, you're embracing the silence. Now what? Well, one of the most amazing things that start to happen is you develop a serious level of emotional control. Picture this, a man who doesn't freak out when things go wrong, who doesn't get easily frustrated, jealous, or desperate for attention, who moves through life with a sense of calm, unshaken by the daily dramas that send most people spiraling. This isn't about being emotionless. It's about mastering your emotions rather than being mastered by them. Living alone forces you to confront your emotions in a way that most people never do. There's no one to vent to, no one to lean on, no one to constantly reassure you. You have to deal with your feelings on your own. This might sound like a disadvantage, but it's actually a huge gift. Because when you have no choice but to manage your emotions yourself, you develop an incredible level of emotional resilience. The Stoics were all about this. Marcus Aurelius famously wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." This means that no matter what happens, whether life gets tough, people disappoint you, or things don't go as planned, you are always in control of how you respond. And a man who lives alone learns this lesson deeply. Without the constant external emotional influences, he becomes the master of his own mind. He doesn't rely on someone else to regulate his emotions. He learns to do it himself. He develops coping mechanisms that make him mentally strong, whether that's through journaling, meditation, working out, or simply sitting with his thoughts instead of running from them. He understands that emotions come and go, but reacting to them impulsively only leads to weakness. I've seen this play out in my own life. I used to be a total emotional roller coaster. I would get easily triggered, I would overreact to things, and I would let my emotions dictate my actions. But as I spent more time alone, I started to become more aware of my emotional patterns. I learned to identify my triggers, to understand why I was feeling a certain way, and to choose a more rational response. I started practicing mindfulness and meditation. I started journaling to process my thoughts and emotions. And over time, I became much more emotionally stable. Think about how many men lose themselves in relationships because they become emotionally dependent. They let arguments ruin their peace. They become needy for attention, or they struggle to be alone because they've never learned to sit with their own emotions. The man who has embraced solitude doesn't have this problem. He has learned that his peace is his responsibility. And because of that, he carries himself with a level of calm that others admire but rarely understand. Emotional control isn't about suppressing feelings. It's about understanding them, processing them, and choosing to respond in a way that aligns with your values and purpose. And when a man masters this, he becomes nearly unbreakable. He develops inner peace, a sense of calm that comes from knowing that he can handle whatever life throws his way. He's not immune to challenges, but he's equipped to face them with resilience and grace. This is what makes him truly powerful, not just in his own life, but also in his relationships with others. He's not needy or clingy. He doesn't seek validation or attention. He simply offers his authentic self, and that's incredibly attractive. 4. The architect of his destiny, the freedom of the lone wolf. In a world that often feels suffocatingly restrictive, freedom is a rare and precious commodity. Most people are trapped in debt, in toxic relationships, in jobs they hate, in lifestyles that drain them. They make choices based on what others expect of them, rather than what truly makes them happy. But a man who lives alone, without the financial or emotional obligations of a relationship, has something incredibly valuable: freedom. The Stoics understood this. They believed that true wealth wasn't about how much you have, but how little you need. As Epictetus famously said, wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants. This is exactly what sets the solitary man apart. He understands that financial and mental freedom go hand in hand. Without the expenses that often come with relationships, dates, gifts, vacations, shared financial burdens, he has the opportunity to manage his money with full control. He isn't pressured into spending to impress anyone or maintain a certain image. Instead, he can focus on building wealth, investing in himself, and securing his future. He makes decisions based on logic, not emotional obligation. But financial freedom is only part of the equation. The real power comes from mental freedom, the ability to make choices without external pressures. A man who lives alone doesn't feel the need to impress anyone, seek approval, or conform to societal expectations. He doesn't have to compromise his dreams, ambitions, or personal growth for the sake of a relationship. He can move cities, change careers, take risks, and live life entirely on his own terms. And that kind of freedom is rare. Most people are constantly weighed down by obligations, whether it's a partner, family expectations, or societal pressure to follow a certain path. But the man who has embraced solitude understands that he is the sole architect of his life. This isn't about avoiding commitment or responsibility. It's about owning your life completely. It's about understanding that the fewer external pressures you have, the more control you have over your time, energy, and future. I remember feeling this sense of freedom when I first started living alone. I had just gotten out a long-term relationship, and I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I could finally do whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, without having to consider anyone else's needs or opinions. I started traveling more. I took up new hobbies. I started working on my own projects. I felt like I was finally living life on my own terms. This isn't to say that relationships are inherently restrictive. A healthy relationship can be incredibly empowering, but it's important to recognize that relationships require compromise, and that compromise can sometimes come at the cost of your own freedom. The man who embraces solitude understands this. He's not afraid to be alone, and he's not willing to sacrifice his freedom for the sake of a relationship that doesn't align with his values. Financial independence, mental clarity, absolute control over his own destiny. That is the freedom of a man who walks alone. And that is a kind of power that no one can take away. 5. The purpose-driven life. Cultivating a deeper sense of meaning. Let's face it, a lot of people drift through life without ever asking themselves the big questions. What am I here for? What's my purpose? They chase relationships, distractions, and temporary pleasures, thinking that happiness comes from external things, money, status, romance. But a man who lives alone, who has embraced solitude, has the rare opportunity to go deeper. Instead of looking outward for meaning, he looks inward. And in doing so, he finds something most never will, a true sense of purpose. When you're constantly surrounded by people, it's easy to lose yourself in the noise. You adapt to their expectations, their habits, their beliefs. You compromise. You give pieces of yourself away in an attempt to fit in, to maintain relationships, to keep the peace. But when you're alone, there's no one to impress, no one to perform for. You're left with nothing but your own thoughts, your own desires, and your own ambitions. And that's where clarity begins. The Stoics believed that a man's highest calling was to live with purpose and virtue. Epictetus famously said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." In other words, decide what kind of man you want to become, then structure your life accordingly. This is something the solitary man understands better than most. With fewer distractions and obligations, he has the time and space to reflect, strategize, and take deliberate action toward his goals. Instead of wasting energy on drama, shallow relationships, or mindless entertainment, he focuses on building himself, his mind, his body, his skills. He dedicates himself to his passions, whether that's mastering a craft, building a business, studying philosophy, or pushing himself physically and mentally. Every day, he wakes up with a mission, not because someone else expects it of him, but because he expects it of himself. Think about the greatest men in history, philosophers, inventors, warriors, leaders. They weren't consumed by the constant need for validation. They were obsessed with their purpose. They spent long hours alone, thinking, working, honing their abilities. And that's exactly what separates an ordinary man from an extraordinary one. The ability to focus deeply on what truly matters. A man without purpose is easily distracted. A man with purpose is unstoppable. The man who lives alone has the greatest advantage of all, the silence and solitude to discover his purpose and pursue it relentlessly. I've found that living alone has allowed me to really hone in on my passions and dedicate time to what I truly enjoy. Instead of spending hours at parties making small talk, I'm able to invest time into building my skills or business. I have the freedom to use my time the way I see fit. 6. The quality over quantity guy. Forming stronger, more meaningful connections. Here's the irony of solitude. The more comfortable you are being alone, the stronger your relationships become. Most people assume that a man who lives without a girlfriend must be isolated, antisocial, or incapable of forming deep connections. But the reality is often the opposite. A man who embraces solitude doesn't waste time on shallow relationships. He chooses quality over quantity. In today's world, people are addicted to socializing, not because they love connection, but because they fear being alone. They jump from relationship to relationship, fill every moment with small talk and meaningless interactions, just to avoid the silence. But a man who has mastered solitude doesn't need constant companionship. He doesn't feel the urge to surround himself with people just for the sake of it. Instead, he is selective. Seneca, ever the wise Stoic, wrote, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you." In other words, don't waste your energy on people who don't add value to your life. This is exactly how the solitary man approaches relationships. Because he is comfortable on his own, he doesn't chase validation, attention, or approval. He doesn't force connections out of loneliness. Instead, he chooses people based on depth, values, and mutual growth. This applies to friendships, mentorships, and even romantic relationships. A man who thrives alone isn't closed off to relationships. He just isn't desperate for them. If he meets someone who aligns with his values, someone who adds depth to his life rather than distraction, he welcomes that connection. But if not, he walks away without hesitation because he isn't afraid of solitude. And this mindset makes him incredibly attractive and respected. When you're not needy, when you're completely at peace being on your own, people are drawn to you. They can sense that you don't need anything from them. You simply enjoy their company for what it is. This creates authentic, powerful connections, free from desperation or superficiality. In a world where people are desperate for attention, the man who doesn't chase it stands out. He commands respect. He cultivates meaningful relationships. And most importantly, he is always in control of his own happiness. The ability to be happy on your own is a huge plus in relationships. It means that you will never need a partner and can be happy alone if the relationship doesn't work out. You'll be able to walk away when you need to instead of being stuck in an unsatisfying relationship. 7. The unshakable Stoic, becoming immune to external circumstances. Finally, let's talk about the ultimate superpower, becoming a true Stoic, unshaken by external circumstances. There's something incredibly powerful about a man who cannot be rattled by the world around him. He doesn't panic when things go wrong. He doesn't crumble under pressure. He doesn't let other people's opinions, emotions, or expectations dictate his actions. Instead, he moves through life with an unbreakable sense of calm, discipline, and self-assurance. This is what it means to embody true Stoicism. And this is exactly what happens to a man who has mastered solitude. The modern world is chaotic, full of distractions, noise, and constant pressure to conform. Most people spend their lives reacting to bad news, to other people's emotions, to the fear of missing out. But a man who has spent time alone, who has learned to rely only on himself, develops something rare, complete inner stability. Seneca, again, gets to the heart of it. A wise man is content with his lot, whatever it may be. This is the essence of Stoicism, accepting life as it is, without complaint, without fear, without desperation. A man who lives alone learns this lesson deeply. He understands that happiness does not come from relationships, money, or status. It comes from within. He is content with what he has because he knows that external things will always come and go. This makes him immune to the common struggles that affect most people. He doesn't feel desperate for love or companionship because he already has everything he needs within himself. He doesn't stress over breakups, failures, or setbacks because he knows that these are just temporary moments in a much larger journey. He doesn't allow the opinions of others to dictate his choices because he has spent enough time alone to truly understand who he is and what he stands for. A man like this is unshakable. No amount of rejection, hardship, or loneliness can break him because he has already conquered the hardest thing of all, himself. And that is what makes him truly free. He has mastered his mind, his emotions, and his actions. He is a force of nature, capable of achieving anything he sets his mind to. This doesn't mean he's emotionless or uncaring. It means he approaches life with a sense of perspective and resilience. He understands that challenges are inevitable, but they don't have to define him. He chooses his response, and he moves forward with strength and grace. The takeaway: the power of choosing your own path. So what have we learned? The man who lives alone, who walks through life without needing constant validation, without depending on a relationship for happiness, without fearing solitude, is not weak, not lost, not incomplete. In fact, he is the opposite. He is strong, self-sufficient, focused, emotionally stable, financially and mentally free. He chooses quality over quantity in relationships. And most importantly, he is at peace with himself. He is not swayed by the distractions of a modern world, nor is he controlled by his emotions. He is a man of purpose, a man of discipline, a man who truly understands what it means to live by Stoic principles. Does this mean relationships are bad? Absolutely not. It simply means that a man should never depend on a relationship for his sense of self-worth or happiness. Because the truth is, the most attractive, most powerful, and most successful men are the ones who don't need anyone. They choose to share their lives with others only when it adds value, not when they feel desperate or incomplete. The ancient Stoics taught that freedom and happiness begin with self-sufficiency. The key to a meaningful life is not found in external pleasures, but in mastering your own mind, emotions, and actions. So, if you've ever felt like solitude makes you weak, understand this. The man who learns to thrive alone is not just strong. He's unstoppable. In a nutshell, here are some key takeaways. Self-sufficiency is king. Learning to rely on yourself builds unshakable confidence and makes you less dependent on others. Embrace the silence. Solitude is an opportunity for self-reflection, mental clarity, and personal growth. Master your emotions. Emotional control is about understanding your feelings and choosing how to respond, rather than being ruled by them. Freedom is power. Living alone can give you financial and mental freedom to pursue your passions and live life on your own terms. Find your purpose. Solitude allows you to go deeper, discover your true purpose, and live a more meaningful life. Quality over quantity. The more comfortable you are alone, the stronger and more authentic your relationships will become. Become unshakable. Mastering solitude cultivates inner stability and makes you immune to external pressures and distractions. Choose your own path. Living the lone wolf lifestyle is a powerful choice that can lead to a more fulfilling and authentic existence. Ultimately, the choice is yours. Whether you're in a relationship or not, these principles of self-sufficiency, solitude, and self-mastery can empower you to live a more meaningful and fulfilling life. So embrace the silence, challenge your assumptions, and discover the power within yourself. You might be surprised at what you find.